Hey there, Russ here. Welcome back to the shop. Um, I really think I'm gonna like doing these rambling Rampage videos. Because I have all these thoughts that I get all the time. So I've got an official book now for this series. Because I think I may do this off and on for a while. I don't know if I'll do it every day, but yesterday I had a question from somebody, and he asked me if I had a jointer and a planer. And yes, I do. I have both of them are rigids. It's the 13-inch planer and the 6-inch jointer. The planer sits underneath the outfeed table of my bandsaw on the same cart. So it's a fairly good sized cart because of a nice long outfeed table on the bandsaw. And it just sits underneath there, and I just push things through. I flip the things down when I want to use it, situate the cart like I want, and then just push my wood through. But most of the time when I use it, it's really for shorter pieces anyway anymore. Again, I don't really work with the big stuff like I used to before I retired. I think I avoid those big projects now. Anyway, when it's smaller, it's lighter. And those of you that are in the same boat know exactly what I'm talking about. So, anyway, yes, I do have them, and they're handy to have. I would not want to do this kind of stuff without those, I'll tell you. Because there were times when if I had to hand plane it, and instead of putting it through my jointer, I probably wouldn't want to do the job. It would be put off and over again. So, anyway, yeah, I think they're important to have. Now, he did mention about the sled with a router. And yes, you can do it that way. And if you can't really afford a jointer, then it is a very inexpensive way to have the capability of flattening. Because if you got to flatten something, you got to flatten it. But I think that a lot of times I probably would just go back to just doing it by hand with some kind of hand plane to flatten the wood if I really didn't have my planer or my jointer. So, but that gets a little tricky doing it that way. Using hand tools takes a lot of practice, and it's nice to have them. But the router sled, it really creates a huge amount of sawdust and chips. So if you're going to do it that way, you better be ready for one of the biggest messes in your shop that you could make. So they will do the job, but I'm just glad that I've never really had a need for one. Now, just as a side point, I do own the Legacy Ornamental Mill, and you can do flat work on that up to, I think it's 11 or 12 inches wide. I'm trying to remember. But anyway, so I can actually use that just like I would when using a planer and use that router to do it. But containing that dust while you're doing it is a must, because boy, they make a mess, the whole shop, if you don't. So there's no good way to collect the dust on something like that. You just have to let gravity eventually take over, and make sure you have your air filters in the shop going pretty good. But yeah, the sled is probably my least enjoyable thought of way of doing it, mainly because of the sawdust and the chips that it creates. So anyway, so much about that. That was an interesting question. I had a thought, and I would love to hear your ideas about it, is what was the most unusual project that you made that you don't know anybody else that's ever done it? And probably the most unusual project I have ever made, and I've made a few weird ones, like my little whiskey keg that I'm turning it into a post office door on the back, making it a little mini safe. So it'll look like a little whiskey barrel that you set on a shelf, but turn it around the back and it's a little safe. So that was unusual, but probably my favorite and most unusual I've never seen anybody make is a gumball machine. And I'm not talking about the little gumball machine with the mason jar where you turn it upside down and you have the little block there. I'm talking about the one that you put the gumballs in, and then you had to shoot them, and they went up through the maze and come out. I made one of those, and I only made one in the prototype, and I still have it. So you guys better not ask me to get it out, because that would be a lot of work. But if I get enough asking, I'll get it out and show it to you. But if you do a gumball machine, out there on the internet. I'm sure you'll see that. It was an old magazine, probably out of the 80s. And it's a really big one. It's about 14 inches tall and about probably 10 or 12 inches wide. Completely vertical. It looked just like a pinball machine that you would hang on the wall and you shoot the ball up. And it would just kind of all the way down type of thing. Had little spinners on it and stuff. And that is probably one of my most unusual projects, and I liked making it. But after I made it, I just decided selling that thing would take so much, because it does take a lot of work, a lot of little parts, that unless you mass produce it, that would be a hard one to be able to make, to be able to justify what you would have to sell it for to make it worth your while. So, but as a one-time project, that was a very cool project to do. So anyway, tell me about your favorite project, the most unusual project. I would love to see what some of the guys have made, because I know there's some really weird stuff out there that we can do if we really want to. So anyway, share if you feel like it. Just leave it in the comments. Another thing I really want to take a few minutes and talk about is I'm doing a lot of electrical work, especially around my Ryobi batteries and battery packs and that sort of thing. And one of the things that I'm going to have to use a lot of in these different units is bus bars. And I'm talking about the one where you can hook several wires to it. And instead of using, you could use fuse blocks, but that gets so expensive. And plus, sometimes you don't really get the size of what you really need to be able to use that fuse block as your main component to bring things to. And there are times when you got to have the bus bar set up. And those things are actually ridiculously priced for what they are, in my opinion. So I was thinking about designing my own. I did some math on it, and I figured out that a 16th inch thick 1-inch angle iron of aluminum has enough mass that you can put up to 60 amps to that piece of metal, that piece of angle iron. So I got to thinking about it, and I thought, what if I take a square piece of wood, put that angle iron on it on an edge, and screw it down at 4 points on the ends to hold it to that piece of wood, and then I can make it any length I want. And then what I would do is take and attach that inside my battery pack and use that as my bus bar. There's no reason why you can't just drill a hole right through it into the wood, get a screw then that would screw down through that aluminum. Even though it's a 1/16 inch thick, that's not thick enough to hold the threads, but the wood underneath would help hold it. So you put your piece in there, put it on the screw that wire down tight until it gets tight against that aluminum bar, and now you have a bus bar where you have everything joined up to the singular place you need it, whether it's a negative bus bar for all the negatives coming back or a positive bus bar coming off the positive. I think that would make a pretty easy and very inexpensive way to do a bus bar. Anyway, I don't know what you thought, what the negatives would be. I'd love to hear your input on that idea. And if I don't hear any negatives about why it could be a problem, I may go ahead and make one and do a full video on something like that, because we're not talking about using that to put 100 amps through this thing. This type of bus bar, if I was going to do it then I would raise it up off of the wood so that the metal would have more space to actually be cool all the way around. So, and I would probably use a thicker piece of metal of aluminum if I was going to do that. But at this point, it would cost you pennies using that aluminum. As long as you're only running 20 or 30 amps at the most of this thing, I don't think it'd be a problem attaching it to a piece of wood like that. So anyway, I'd love to know what your thoughts are about it. I think that actually is not a bad way to design a bus bar. So unless there's something going on there, I don't know. So like I said, I'm not the most experienced with all the different types of electronic things out there, but in making these battery packs and that sort of thing, and I have several projects I want to do in that Ryobi arena. That's going to be something we want to talk about sooner or later too. My thoughts about those things. But one of the things you're really going to need if you're going to do electrical work, it seems like a lot of times if you're building things, is you need a pretty good bus bar. And I just think the ones I see out there that are available are just way too expensive for what you're getting. I think that this would be a good way to solve that and save you that $10 to $20 bus bar price that you see out there. I still can't believe they cost that much. Anyway, let me know what you think about that. What else did we want? One more thing I really kind of wanted to mention real quick is about the Workbench. And I would like to talk a few times about the Workbench design, to how I think would be an ideal workbench in a shop. But there's one thing in particular about workbenches. Lately I've been watching some workbench builds. And they all insist it has to be flat. They all insist it has to be sturdy because you don't want it to rack. And they all have to be semi-heavy so that if you're pushing on it, doing something heavy, it isn't going to move on you. But I've never heard anybody talk about one of the other things that is really important, at least in my shop, and that is having it level. It's really important in your shop to have a good, dependable, level surface. And the more of them you have, the better off you are. And because level, sometimes you're doing things, and so I do some of my stuff using bubble gauges and doing bubble measuring. For example, when I'm drilling, a lot of times, I'm just going to hand drill a hole straight through. Rather than having to set up the drill press and do it, I have a bubble on my drill. In fact, Ryobi makes one of these, and one of the older ones, the blue. I have one that actually has the bubble built in. But everybody asked me when I talked about this in a video, and a lot of people out there were saying, well, I don't have that on mine. What do I do? So I showed them how to actually take and buy a bubble, and I did a video on it. And this is dead on for this drill to give me a perfect. If I drill into something that's level and I drill down using my bubble, I'll get a straight vertical hole in it and I do it every time. So it saves me a lot of time by going to the drill press when I'm doing things on the workbench. If it's level, if that bench isn't level, this ain't going to work right. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that you want that surface in your shop to be extremely perfectly level in all directions as well as flat. It really makes a difference, and that's why on my workbench I do insist that this thing is always level as well as flat, so I can get away with doing those things. So anyway, I don't know why nobody ever talks about it. So do you have a level surface? Do you use bubble gauges to get angles and to do different things like I do? So anyway, I'm just curious what you think about the idea of it being level, because nobody seems to think it's that important out there. And I think in the shop where you're liable to make anything or work on anything, sometimes it's nice to know that you're working on a level surface as well as flat. Anyway, I want to thank you for coming by. I could probably still go on for another half hour, but these videos would get way too long to try to download at that point. So we'll call it a day. If you have any questions, any thoughts about any of these things, your input is always appreciated. And actually, I kind of enjoy them. So don't be afraid and don't be shy. Also, hit that like button or that dislike button if you want to give an opinion about what you think about what I'm doing here in these ramblings. And if you have a particular subject, just let me know what that is. I'm willing to talk about just about anything in the workshop. So, but don't be afraid to use that like and dislike, really. Most importantly, though, if you would, please come back again and you might want to bring your coffee next time or your cold one, because these things are going to be a while as we do them. And all you have to do is sit there and enjoy the conversation. So please, come back again because I'm nowhere near done. Thanks. We'll see you guys again. Maybe even tomorrow. Bye.